Hi, friends. Welcome to the Say What You Love podcast. I'm your host, Mark Titus. Today's episode, we feature Stacy Bare. Stacy was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and is a husband, father, skier, surfer, and climber. He's a veteran of the Iraq War and co-founded the Great Outdoors Lab in 2014 to put scientifically defensible data behind the idea of time outside as healthcare. Wow, imagine that. Stacy's the 2014 National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. In 2015, he launched Adventure, Not War, a project designed to take him back to all the places he fought, cleaned up after war, or was supposed to fight in. The first ANW expedition saw he and rock climbing legend Alex Honnold put up new climbing routes in Angola. In 2017, he and two fellow veterans completed a first ski descent of Mount Halgurd in Iraq, chronicled in the award-winning film he produced, Adventure Not War, that was screened in more than 50 festivals around the world. During the pandemic, Stacy started Friends of Grand Rapids Parks to make Grand Rapids, Michigan the healthiest, most park-equitable city in America, with goals to achieve 40% tree canopy for Grand Rapids and for all people who live within 10 minutes of a park or open space. As someone who's worked with the National Park, National Forest, and BLM systems, Stacy started working with tribes to help them reconnect with land that once belonged to their people and make sure that the rights afforded them in the treaties signed decades ago are upheld. In this episode, we talk about surviving and emerging from trauma, welcoming veterans home, healing through recovery, adventure, not war, green spaces and wildness for everyone, and more topics. Hey, Stacy lays it bare, and I'm a better man for having a conversation with him. I hope you find something you can use from his experience and wisdom too. Onward.
How do you say what you love when the world is burning down? How do you say what you love and pushes come to shove? How do you say what you love when things are upside down? How do you say what you love when times are getting tough?
Stacy Bare, welcome to the show. Where are you beaming in from today?
Beaming in from beautiful Grand Rapids, Michigan, on America's favorite West Coast.
Did you just make that up?
I did a little bit, but we do talk about the West Coast out here, being, because we're on the West Coast of Lake Michigan, and since you're on America's West Coast, I just wanted to get a little needle in.
Roger. Well, needle felt. My family originally came from the Midwest, from Wisconsin, and the way they found their way out here was my dad. He didn't exactly trick my mom, but he definitely kind of pushed and loaded the car up and headed west for the woods and the mountains and the fishing and the hunting. But that bug was firmly ensconced because of being from the Midwest in Wisconsin. So, let's just start right there. I know this is kind of a new experience for you, but let's go back in time here. Let's get caught up. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to Michigan at this point.
Yeah, how we got to Michigan. So I grew up in South Dakota. My dad was an ag professor. He actually got his master's degree at Michigan State. He taught ag communications, and he had a television show in South Dakota called Garden Line, and you could call in and ask questions about your garden, and he and his buddies would give the answers. But, when I was 17 years old, I wanted to get out of my hometown. It was the biggest city I'd ever lived in. I thought it was a city of 15,000 people, and I got an ROTC scholarship and took that as an opportunity to go explore the rest of the country. I went to the University of Mississippi for undergraduate, which was a great experience in terms of food and music and people and literature. And then I was in the military. So I was stationed in Germany, did a stint in Bosnia, left the Army. The Army and I have always had different ideas about what I should do. And I think in large part that's because of my first name. The Army never quite figured out, and the VA slowly is figuring out that I'm a fella. I'm a boy. I don't need the annual pap smear anymore.
Did you actually get that?
When I was coming out of Iraq in 2007,
Hmm.
we were going through this like medically orderly checklist. I headed over towards women's health, and because it was on my checklist, and I had a conversation with the orderly, and I was like, I don't think I need this. And the orderly was like, you do, it's on your checklist. And I was like, I don't. Like, here I am. And but there's nobody more powerful in the United States military, excuse me, in the United States military than a medical orderly.
Mm,
So I headed back to the doc. We had a laugh, and she checked my box, and away we went.
yeah.
But yeah, so I was in the army, and then I did a couple of years landmine clearance in Angola in the former Soviet state of Georgia, and then got recalled. Did a year in Baghdad, left the army a second time, ended up in graduate school in Philly for a couple of years, which was a really great experience. And then my first job out of graduate school was out in Colorado, and that put me on a whole different path than where I thought I was going. Right, I thought I was going to be, an East Coast designer, architect, uh, working in cities, working on these big projects like the High Line out in Brooklyn. That's what I was really motivated for. And then also to go back to the places I had been. Baghdad is such a beautiful city, right? I mean, it's one of the first cities that humans ever made. It's beautiful around the two rivers, and the landscape is really gorgeous. And I thought, well, maybe someday I could go back and be part of rebuilding Baghdad. I was there. That was my job formally in the United States military. But I thought, what if I could go back? How cool would that be? But I ended up on a really different path. Buddy got me out rock climbing as an alternative to death by suicide or rejoining the military. And that took me on this whole other career arc. And then with the pandemic, we ended up in Salt Lake City for a decade. And then with the pandemic, the work I was doing really fell apart because it was group outdoor work, it was corporate speaking, it was organizing big events. And there wasn't a place to do that, right, during the pandemic. So I ended up driving a forklift for a bike company. I went back to work at the local Air Force base. And my wife and I were commuting in opposite directions. Utah for us, as beautiful and as wonderful as it is, as many friends and wonderful memories we have there. We got married there. We bought our first house. Our daughter was born. We just felt that it was no longer home. And we had had a really hard time telling one another that, right? Because we were worried that the other person would be really upset if we were like, hey, I'm not really feeling the mountains. But both of us had grown up going to Minnesota. um, I went to Boy Scout camp on the lake next door to where she went to her family reunion. Um, she grew up in Arizona. I went to high school with some of her cousins in South Dakota. So it was pretty crazy that we finally met. And her mom is from Jackson, Michigan. And so we've been coming out here over the years. And in 2019, we came out and visited. Her grandma headed up to the UP, and our daughter's a wonderful human, super engaged, fun kid. But you put that kid in one of the Great Lakes, and she 10x's, right? She's a whole
Wow.
different, she's just so much more herself. And so as we were heading back to Detroit from that trip, we're like, we should buy a cabin out here. Like,
Hmm.
this should be our place. And then the pandemic happened. And when it came around 2021, I was stuck in traffic on the way home, and some other things happened in our life where we got to the conversation where we finally had it, and we're like, I think Utah's done with us. I think the Wasatch wants us to leave. And the our kind of family joke is everybody knows that John Muir quote, right? The mountains are calling and I must go. Well, I tell you what, Mark, if the mountains can call, the mountains can hang up. And we'd been listening to that ringtone, but not really paying attention to it. That dead, for those, like, we're of the age where we remember that hung up ringtone, right?
Mm.
Beep, 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 beep. And that's where we were at. And we looked around and said, where do we want to go? And reached out to friends all over. And Michigan just leaned back super hard back to us.
Mhm.
And we came out, we checked out West Michigan, we fell in love. And the opportunity for the position I'm in now as executive director of Friends of Grand Rapids Parks opened up, and I was lucky enough to get hired. And so we traded in a great mountain range, one of the best mountain ranges, I think, in America, with the Great Lakes and fresh coast dunes and endless exploration and opportunity out here. So it's been a huge transition, but it's been an incredible opportunity. And for us in our life, it has been absolutely the right decision.
Amazing. Well, I'm hearing a lot of being led by wonder and awe, and that's a lot of what I want to talk about. But before that, I'm in a position in life right now looking at transitions and creating some new rituals and some transformative kind of salience in my life. And one of the things that, as I'm wading into this, is that it's apparent both in terms of wisdom teaching and as I'm learning on my own, that acknowledging the shadow, acknowledging the dark parts of our life, is not only healthy, it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. So there's a whole lot here we're going to talk about in terms of the incredible work you've done and you are doing and you're going to do. But first off, I want to thank you for your service to our country. And I wanted to explore a moment of, you mentioned having suicidal ideation, and mental health is something we talk about a lot on the show. What is that place that you were in post-service or during service? And then how did that frame for you what you call positive awe experiences?
That's a really big question.
Yeah.
One of these days, maybe I'll put pen and paper and get a book out about a lot of that. But yeah, I came home from Iraq in 2007. I've talked about this before. I've written about this. My home record, because I had lived overseas, my home record was my brother's house in Hartford, Connecticut. And, the abrupt transition from being in the military to out of the military. A month prior, 3 weeks prior, I was getting my truck blown up in Baghdad and I was getting shot at. 3 weeks later, I'm waiting at Bradley International Airport for my brother to come pick me up. And Hartford clears out quick in between flights, right? And the sun is setting. I got home earlier than anybody expected. My brother had to finish work. He was hustling to get to me, alone at BDL and watching the sunset. My brother picks me up and we got to go to the grocery store. And I just was overwhelmed at the choice in America, right? Absolutely overwhelmed by it all. And at the time and moving forward, a couple of years, I struggled with a lot of drug addiction. I struggled with so many different things around that. And there's so many different ways, like there's so much I want to tell you about the story because there's all these little intricacies and there's these things that happen. But the long of it is I kept trying to blame my military service as to why I was feeling the way I was, because that's what was available to me. That was the narrative that people were being told. And that's how you got your VA benefits, right? But I got home in 2007. PTSD wasn't added as a disability until 2014. When I first filed my paperwork for PTSD, you had to know the American name, social security number, and rank you had seen killed. That's how you got PTSD. It wasn't through watching Iraqi children get killed. It wasn't through watching a dog eat the neck out of a dead man on a street in Baghdad. It wasn't even picking up the intestines of a Navy EOD operator who had blown himself up at base, and you put those intestines there and work to stop the double femoral bleeding. They didn't die, but the person in front of them did, but you didn't even notice them because their body was so mutilated by the time you arrived first on the scene. And I didn't take the time to write down that name and social security number. I didn't even really remember who that individual was. Even when I went to the funeral to reconnect with the people of the team, I didn't get the name, rank, and serial number of the individual that I helped because I didn't think to do that. And that was the burden we were placing on our soldiers. It had to be an American. You had to know the name. You had to know the social security number or rank. That's since changed, which is positive. But for a number of veterans, I felt like I owned that PTSD or that challenge. And I remember going to a to a therapist in my early 30s, and we sat down and we talked for an hour. And I said to her, I said, hey, at the end of it, I said, I don't know if this is working out. I don't know if I'm going to come back. She said, why not? I said, well, first of all, it doesn't feel bad. I don't feel bad, so I don't think this is working. And second of all, we haven't even talked about the war. And she was like, how old were you when you went to war the first time? I said, 25. And she said, and how old were you when you came home? I said, 29. It said, and how many things have you done? Like, and you're 33 now. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, so you don't think any of those 25 years leading up to war had an impact? You don't think anything you did over the last several years responding to that war has had an impact? She's like, you think it was just the war? And so there's all of that, right? And I think PTSD, recognizing that PTSD isn't owned by veterans, that not all trauma is PTSD, that not all bad things are trauma. And then the fourth thing that I've really been digging into lately, Mark, and it's been a rage of mine that I think I'm finally able to kind of address and begin thinking through, is the notion of the hero's journey,
Mm-hmm.
because I hate it.
Hmm.
And I think Homer probably wrote a third book after the Odyssey where one of two things happened. We either got to see uh, Odysseus and Penelope age and laugh at their mistakes and unpack all the things that happened, or Homer would have revealed that it was all a farce. But instead, we got these two books, which in my mind are best satire at worst, the worst of what the human experience could be. But I think those books are satiring the experience of elite leadership and the value of war because it's so ridiculous. But when you come home, so much has been made thanks to Joseph Campbell and other folks who have glommed onto these ideas about this hero's journey. And it makes for an okay Hollywood tale, but ultimately it creates separateness and individuality. And what we're missing out of the military, and why many people go to the military, and why some of the times when people get hurt in the military, it's so painful, is that connection,
Mm-hmm.
is that community.
Mm-hmm.
But the hero's journey, which many veterans are asked to embark on when they get home, and everyone is asked to embark. This is the rags to riches story, right? It's so individualistic. Like, no wonder we're so polarized right now, because we believe that if we just work hard enough, if we can be strong enough, if we can keep going, or the flip side, it's all about self-care. And we're missing the point on self-care. But again, that's super individualized. Like, what hope do we have without that connection with one another? So that's, I can dig into more details around that. Generational trauma, what does it look like when your family, like my mom's family came from pogrom in Eastern Europe, and then they settled in Nebraska, which had just been cleared out by pogrom of the Pawnee. So
Mm-hmm.
if you've just escaped with your life, you're not going to question where it is you landed if it feels even remotely safe, right? And that's where I come from on my mom's side. Like, who's not going to have some trauma, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But the value of that war was because as a veteran, I'm allowed to have PTSD. Very few other people still are allowed to have PTSD, right? But especially when I came out of war, you could have PTSD if you were a veteran, if you were a cop, if you were a firefighter, maybe if you had breast cancer, and maybe if you had cancer as a kid. Other than that, most people weren't allowed to have PTSD, if you know what I mean by allowed.
First of all, thank you for going there with me and trusting me with your inner vulnerability and your story. It's important. It's sacred, and I believe observing your work, it is going to be a healing balm. Your ability to share that with people. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and secondly, you lit up about 100 lights for me. I'm going to try to stay focused because I want to talk about all of them. But a few observations are that yeah, I think we're just coming to a sense of language about what trauma is, varying degrees of trauma. I have friends that, a lot of indigenous friends that are experiencing and have experienced intergenerational trauma. It's just so apparent, and
Throw on the whole boarding school situation.
it's incredible. It's incredible. I'm working with a director right now, Marie Clements, who did a film called Bones of Crows. It's a Canadian film. If you haven't seen it yet, it's amazing. You should see it.
Good call.
Bones of Crows, and
Okay.
it takes place during World War II, and it hits right on the head the residential schools in Canada, which of course we had its mirror here in the States. But back to, look, we're just trying to come to an understanding of language of how to express what this is, and that yeah, we can all carry various pieces of this. And where do we go from here? I'm reading a book right now about soulcraft, and I'm just into it right now. I mentioned some transitions and transformation. I'm working on some of that myself. But in the very first part of this book, the author's talking about seeking community, seeking his place, seeking where are my people? Where's my place in the world? And guess what? He's going through wilderness and through nature to do that. So to come back around here, why do you believe nature is the great healer? And how have positive awe experiences kind of shaped and molded and reframed and turned your life inside out from the place of darkness that you've experienced?
Speaking of, so you may hear, I can't tell if we're under a tornado warning, if they're just practicing the public safety system. But if all of a sudden I just jump under my desk, that's what's going to happen here.
Okay. And you
yeah, I mean, I've been through, as many people are, like the journey with nature and the journey with awe or ecstatic experience, right? And I think we're fundamentally looking at the same thing when the same thing that folks who advocate for psychedelic experiences, it's ultimately the same thing in many ways, I think, that we're advocating for when we're going outdoors. And, the first time I had that like overwhelming experience of awe, and I've had a lot, all of us have awe all throughout our lives, right? It's just whether or not we recognize it and begin to cultivate it. And one of the amazing things about that is that awe and wonder, cultivating a sense of awe and wonder, are not diminishing, right? You can continue to cultivate that. And the more you work on it, the more it grows. The more you recognize it in your life, the more you'll recognize it in your life. And it was such an amazing experience when I went rock climbing with my buddy Chuck. And there were a couple other things that happened with that, right? I had a lot of suicidal ideation, which has been a battle for me for a long time, even well before the military, and even well after the military. And at this point, so much of my time has been outside that I found so much resilience because of the outdoors. And now as climate is shifting, we've had 2 really crappy winters here in Michigan. I haven't had the number of ski days I would normally look forward to. And so it's like, damn, I got to be resilient again. Like, why do I have to keep being resilient? I bounce back. I don't want to keep crumpling up and then figuring out how to flatten myself out again, or that's like mixing metaphors of bouncing back. And I was thinking about crumpling tinfoil, but it's the connection that happens to yourself, to the people around you when you're in these beautiful places, right? And it's what you talk about when you have these experiences with other people and how that stuff bonds you together. And it's that feeling, right? The positive feeling of awe is that the world is so much bigger than you, but you still are guaranteed a place and have a place in it. And you can see the connection and you can see all those moments and kind of tendrils reaching out, right? The negative side of awe is when you feel so small and the world is so big and you don't have a right to be there and the world is going to crush you. And I think a lot of us are feeling aspects of negative awe. And certainly I felt that in the military as well. But sometimes I think you've got to have both, right? You can't have up without down. Yeah. And I think about some of those experiences as well when I look back on it, specifically this massive dust storm that came raging across the forward operating base I was on. And there's that brief moment right before you're about to get the shit kicked out of you by sand, where you recognize the beauty and the colors and the hues of the oranges and pinks in that sand in this overwhelming tan cloud, right? That's coming at you violently and angrily. And you can see those just pricks of beauty before you jump underneath the bunker and just try to keep everything, as much sand as possible, out of your eyes and the orifices that are available for the sand to get into, which even if they're covered, the sand just finds its way to pack in. Uh, but I can look at those as moments of positive awe, right? Like I can retrain my body to do that. I think where I really struggled ultimately was thinking that every time I had to go out, I had to have a mind blowing experience like I did that first
Mm-hmm.
time, or
Mm-hmm.
like when I caught my first wave as a surfer, or, I mean, if you're fishing, right, the tug is the drug. And sometimes, right, like it might be the tiniest little fry that is the most fun fish to catch. And other times you might be battling with an absolute lunker. There's something where the joy isn't as much there as it was before, right? And it dips and it rolls. And and I think we struggle because we think every time awe has to be this mind-blowing experience. And what I've really realized over time though is that those awe experiences open me up to curiosity, to conversation, and ultimately allowed me to get the help that I wanted to get to and to do the things I wanted to go do in life. And so awe, it is a magical healer, but it doesn't heal everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it creates a space for you to do that. It creates a space for mindfulness. It creates a space for reflection and gratitude, a connection to something bigger than yourself. You might call that God. Other people might call that, the universe. I have my own faith um, tradition that I grew up in and that I've gotten back to, but nature has helped bring me back to those things. And
Mm-hmm.
you can see it written all throughout scripture and history, regardless of what it is people are trying to explain. And so I think it's this universal aspect of us that just pulls us up, right? It lifts the floor of our mental health and it removes the ceiling of how far we can go emotionally. Um, and over the last couple of years, working more in city parks and regional parks, I've been able to find that awe in all sorts of little places. And whereas before I thought it was only these massive visual landscapes, and I think we're overly trained towards the visual landscapes, which are great, but we can also experience awe through taste and through smell and through sound and through touch. Um, but it's in nature because we are of nature, right? I mean, like we talk a lot about our cities and the break of nature, but you'll like we've just figured out termite mounds better than termites, really. Like, what's a high rise if not a termite mound? And why are we so insistent that that's not nature?
That's an amazing question, and one I've actually been talking about in the last 48 hours. I'm going to come back to that in depth. I want to hover one more beat here in Shadowland, to touch on something that's very familiar with me. I am like you. I'm in recovery. I'm 7 years in recovery today.
That's awesome. Happy birthday.
Thanks, man. And I'm wondering if I know, and I've spoken about my moment of clarity many times in meetings. Would you be willing to share about your moment of clarity and the breaking of dawn on your horizon that at least started that path to recovery for you?
Sure. It's really interesting. I actually thought about recovery when you brought up, your friend who's seeking out and looking for their people, looking for their solution. And recovery is such challenging space to be in, to welcome other people into your journey,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it's somebody else in recovery, right? And I want to caveat all this by saying it's such a deeply personal journey for
Yeah.
people to recovery. And I also am a really strong believer that sobriety is an outstanding tool that can be abused in many of the ways that alcohol or substance can be abused.
You bet.
But one of the things that I really enjoyed about my long-term sobriety was when I did have the opportunity and realized that sobriety wasn't the end goal, But the healing from why I felt I had to erase my mind and numb my mind so much, that's the end goal. And I think a lot of times sobriety can be weaponized to ensure that healing never happens, in the same way that alcohol was weaponized, right? And if we're just trading one system for the other, we're not moving forward. And one of the hard parts is when you're thinking about like finding your own people, right? Um, as my journey began to veer from a lot of the people I started it with, I think other people, when you find that thing that works so well for you, and somebody else comes along and says, well, this is how I'm doing it. But that's great that that's how you're doing it. It feels like a different way is threatening you, not just your method of recovery, but you, right? And that's what can be so hard about recovery, is just navigating all these really intense feelings. Because I don't think I've ever been so selfish as in those first couple of years of recovery. I think it's such a need for that selfishness. How do I stay safe? But being aware of that, right? And I remember like I worked the steps, and there was a lot of value in those. And when people talk to me about recovery, I'm always like, take what you can, but it may not be everything for you. And it says that right in the big book, right? This isn't the only way, it's our way, but then it gets canonized differently. Or has that happened before in any
know.
sort of scripture? I
Yeah,
don't know.
right.
Yeah. Fairly certain he said everybody gets love. Anyway, that's so, yeah. But
I mean, was there a particular moment for you that was
yeah,
a rock bottom, and then into a moment of clarity? Like, man, I mean, mine was
yeah,
super freaking distinct. Like,
totally.
yeah.
And I apologize for the really long caveat.
Oh no, we're rolling, brother. Keep going.
I'm tangential, if you haven't noticed.
I identify.
More like
Trust
a
me.
pack of Greenland dogs versus American sled dogs, just all over the place. Um, yeah, there definitely was, man. I had just moved out to DC. I was about 3 years removed from my last stint in the military. A lot of my buddies that were still in or who had taken jobs in the military industrial complex were in DC. And every night was like homecoming, every night. And I went out and I threw down hard. And it was a celebration of life. And that was always the thing too. Like when I did a ton of cocaine, I was like, man, I just missed 4 years of fun. Like I don't have a problem. You have a problem. And so I was throwing down really hard. And I woke up in my buddy's place, and had to get back. We were like just on the edge of southern North Virginia, if that makes sense. And I had to get back up to my place, which was just in the Tacoma Park, Maryland side of the border. And I had to get up there. It was May. Had to put a suit on. I had to go into a meeting. I sweat through the suit, and I sweat through my tie.
Oh God.
Like it was disgusting.
Wow.
And I smelled like
wow.
I smelled like I don't know, like if they had brewed something specifically called ass vodka, like that's what I was. And
I think I've daubed that behind my ears from time to time. Yeah.
Totally, just a little bit of like
just a touch on special occasions.
Yeah. Broken ass vodka.
Wow.
And I went to this meeting. It was an important meeting for my job and connecting. And I'd only been in this job for about a month. And it was an awesome opportunity. And the woman cleared out the room. She saw what was going on. She smelled what was going on. Everybody else had smelled it too. And she cleared out the room and she said, Stacy, you've got an amazing opportunity in front of you. She had met me once before. She was like, you're passionate, you're committed. She's like, but you got to sort yourself out. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you feel free to ask questions. But my recommendation is go get yourself sorted out. And when you feel better, we can have this meeting. And the grace that was extended to me in that moment,
that's
and
beautiful.
the kindness and the forgiveness, as well as the honesty, I left. I was shaking, right? I was now fully in withdrawals. And I called my buddy Ted, who I knew had had been through a similar but different path. And I said, Ted, what do I do? And Ted was like, well, how are you feeling, man? And I was like, I told him the whole story. And he's like, well, how are you feeling? And I was like, I just told you I'm feeling like shit, man. Like I'm gonna lose my job. I'm gonna do, I just got out here. It's all bad. And he's like, is it? I mean, but how are you feeling? Like he just kept asking, like, how are you feeling? And I was like, yeah, I don't know, man. And he's like, do you think you can make it through the day? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, you're good. You're okay. You're all right, man. And we just kept checking in with each other. I set a deadline for my last drink. It was a very different method than I think a lot of other people have gone through, but and then I was sober for a day. That's where in any of these times there's an opportunity for real danger. But I was really lucky. And I had a lot of super supportive people. I had a lot of people who didn't ask me why I was an alcoholic,
Yeah.
why I had a drug addiction. They just accepted that that's where I was at this point in my life, and that I would tell them the why if and when I felt it was important. And they would ask me the why if and when they felt it was important for me to tell them that story and that trust. And obviously with my partner, with my wife, that makes a ton of sense. With other people, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And a podcast conversation with somebody else in recovery, it's really easy.
Mm.
In a job interview, it's not, right? Like this stuff
Right.
gets out there. Um, I've had people tell me they were worried that my PTSD wasn't, that I'd get stressed out at a job and I couldn't handle it,
Mm.
or I've had people, so it's real. That fear is real, but I think the more vulnerable we can be with each other and the more honest, the better. I think there's also a point where we can be, I've also definitely used vulnerability as a coping mechanism and as an unhealthy tool.
Hmm.
But, you know, most things that can be good can also be used incorrectly.
That's for sure. But you know what I'm hearing a lot of through this as a thread is resilience, getting up again, and compassion, like the woman in the interview and your friends, giving of themselves, and you now giving of yourself. All of that in dedication to healing and to transformation. Halftime. Did you know you could have the world's finest wild salmon shipped directly to your door? It's true. Our Ava's Wild Bristol Bay sockeye salmon is the lowest carbon footprint center plate protein on the planet, and it's packed with heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. Don't take our word for it. Ask chefs like Seattle's Tom Douglas and Taichi Kitamura, who are serving our sashimi-grade wild salmon in their award-winning restaurants. You can have the exact same fillets we deliver to them shipped flash frozen to your door. What's more, Ava's Wild donates 10% of our profits to indigenous-led efforts to protect Bristol Bay in perpetuity. That's the place we source the salmon from. Right now, that looks like supporting the Bristol Bay Foundation, granting Bristol Bay's indigenous young people scholarships to four-year colleges, universities, and trade schools. Visit avaswild.com to join our growing community doing good by eating right. That's save, spelled backwards, wild.com, and eat wild to save wild. Now, back to the show. With that, I want to ask you, how did adventure, not war, come into your consciousness and then come into being?
Yeah, I should remake that website. I should put that website back into electronic conscious. My real thought there was, if the outdoors could be so good for me,
Mm-hmm.
then it was like, how good can it be for other veterans, right? Because I think a lot of people who get into helping each other and helping their communities don't always feel like they can, like that they need that help, right? And also, like, if I'm doing the helping, then I don't need to help myself, right? And so I think we oftentimes use other people to help our own self-regulation. And I steal that idea from We Can Do Hard Things, which is a wonderful other podcast out there. Um, but then I was like, well, what would it look like? Because every time I got to go to these places, I met really amazing people and I got to see really beautiful things. And now I can recognize some of those as awe and wonder and community and connection, right? But at the time, I was just like, I came home from Iraq, and first of all, everybody wanted to buy you a beer.
Right.
Everybody said thank you for your service.
Right.
I didn't know what they were thanking me for.
Yeah.
Just I prefer welcome home because it kind of like it still shares that you're grateful at home.
Mm.
It shares without necessarily forcing me to be like, well, I know you're just saying the right thing because you mean it, and I know you mean it, and I really appreciate that. But I would recommend when people meet a veteran to say, hey, welcome home. I'm glad you're home.
That's nice.
Because you don't know what my service was like and the conflicted feelings I have of it. And there are things that I still hold on to that I'm trying to let go of that I'm not very proud of, or that I wonder if it was the right thing to do. And I worry that you wouldn't be so grateful if you knew those things. I worry that you might think of me very differently than the conversation we're having if you knew those things. Um, so, but heard these things, people said these things about the people in places where I was at war or cleaning up after war. And I thought, that's just not true. And so Adventure Not War was an opportunity for me to go back to those places with an emphasis on awe and wonder and an emphasis on shining a light on different stories that were there and different communities were there. So I've been to 3 of the places. So Angola, Alex Honnold and I went back to climb in Angola in 2015. My
And
wife was pregnant with our
for
daughter.
for clarification, Alex Honnold, could you give a little primer on who he is?
He's one of the funniest dudes. He is the quirkiest human from Sacramento, California. He also free soloed Yosemite.
Yeah, that's right.
But he's a really great guy. And I don't climb as much anymore. I was actually thinking about it the other day. I was like, man, it's been a long time since I've talked to Alex, because he's still climbing and I'm planting trees. He's climbing out west and I'm planting trees in Lake Michigan. But just a really great guy. And you know, to be with Alex when he smiles and cracks up and tells jokes is a real gift. But Ted Hesser, Mario Birdwell, I'm missing the team as well, that went out with us. It was a great team. The film team was also super awesome in Angola. 2016, my daughter was born, and my wife and I were having a conversation after Wilder was born, where she said, when are you going to go back to Iraq? And I said, well, it didn't happen before Wilder was born, so probably when Wilder's in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And Mackenzie said, well, don't you think it's important that we model for our daughter that we have dreams and goals and things that we need to do, and to be cautious, but also live in such a way that we work to achieve those dreams. And this next part, she swears she didn't say, but was also, if you go and you don't make it home, like, I'll be able to remarry and she won't know the difference. And she's always like, I didn't say that.
I'm glad she can laugh. That's good.
Yeah. But she was joking, I think. So 2017, with a lot of support from Ann Kirchick, who was one of my mentors at the North Face, and Ann passed right before the pandemic. She was an amazing human. I went back. Max Lowe shot that with Robin and Matthew. We went to Iraq, and that was a really incredible experience. And then coming home from Iraq, it took me about 2 years to recover from that. So 2018, I went and skied in Japan with some friends, had a really, really great time. And then met Ben Sturgielewski, who made one of my all-time favorite movies, at a film festival. And we started chatting, and I said, hey, do you want to go to Afghanistan? Like, that'd be fun. And he was like, yeah, sure. So I was able to raise about $50,000 for that first trip. And we went out to Afghanistan in the winter of 2018-19. And it was just an awesome experience. One of the best, easiest expeditions I've ever been on. Our Afghan hosts were just incredible. Such wonderful mountains, so many awesome memories of that time. And then, the film got a little delayed, and then there was the pandemic, and then there was the fall of Afghanistan, and Ben and his partner Katie did so much amazing work, there was such a huge network of people working to get Afghans safely out. Mm-hmm. And so that was incredible. And they had a huge role in all that. And then, it was 2020 and then 2021, and Ben got some funding to go shoot the main narrator in the film. Ben invited me to go back and shoot with him in his new home as a refugee. And it was also the first day that I was starting this new job here in Grand Rapids. And So it was a really tough thing to do, and not go, because that had been such my life. But Sturge came back, and he and Katie, and they linked up with another Emmy award-winning Afghan filmmaker, and now that film will debut in Tribeca in a month. So that was Afghanistan, which is awesome. Champions of the Golden Valley, debuted in Tribeca. And I hope to see that production team win all the awards, and we get this out. It's a 90-minute film. But also ended up in Kyrgyzstan in 2020 on behalf of the Afghans in some way. They said, how do we create something that gets more people here? And so we worked with this amazing group of Kyrgyz skiers and a couple Dutch folks to do a free ride tour. And now there's a free ride world qualifying in Kazakhstan, and the Kyrgyz are running their own tour. It's really amazing. But the pandemic halted all that. And now I'm in GR, and I still got 2 places left to go: Bosnia and the former Soviet state of Georgia and Abkhazia. And then I'd really like to kind of take that same lens to Michigan as well. We had the film ready to go last year, but there wasn't enough snow to do a ski film in Michigan last year. So, but that's what's left of Adventure Not War. It's probably the longest, most boring way I've ever told that story. So my apologies to your listeners.
Not at all. I'm so intrigued now. In fact, I want to drill into it just a little bit more. What is the core mission for Adventure Not War? How did that even come as a fractal into your mind?
Yeah, the core mission is just to share other stories with people that they may not see in the media, of the beauty of these places. Most people probably wouldn't be able to necessarily pick Afghanistan out of a map. Same thing with Iraq. That's fine.
Sadly
America's a
true.
huge place.
Hmm.
There's 50 states here, right? And all the territories. We live in a huge place. We live in a massive country on a huge, beautiful, gorgeous world. And there's so much negativity bias in the news, regardless of the political bias in the news. The negativity bias is across mainstream media, it's across, smaller media,
Yep.
non-mainstream media.
Yep.
But I just was like, if we can shine a light, and even a few people see that light and are like, hey man, that looks like a really cool place. Looks like you met some really neat people. I never thought of Iraq that way. I never thought of Angola as an adventure destination. Maybe if I thought of it at all, I thought it was a prison in Louisiana. Um, we just wanted to create, I just wanted to create some shifts in the way people thought about things. If it goes big, awesome. But I think my thought has always been, and I heard some musicians talk about this once. They're like, we just wanted to make good music for our friends, and anything after that is bonus. And I just wanted to tell good stories that my buddies and the people I met would be proud of, and anything after that is bonus. And I think that's what people will see if they go
Wonderful.
back and watch the old films or see the Afghan film that's coming out, um, Champions of the Golden Valley, or or if people want to get involved and support the Bosnia film or the Abkhazia film, and those come out too.
Well, we will make sure to link to those films and opportunity to see them in our show notes. I'll get that from you. Thank you for sharing that. And honestly, it's what we're hoping to do here with this show too, is try to create resonance with positive stories that are a little more geared toward, I don't know, the actual texture of the actual world. And speaking of that, I know I long for wild places. Alaska is deep in my soul. Here in Washington State, North Cascades, the San Juan Islands, these are places that are utterly sacred to me. I heal and I thrive there. But you are heavily involved in creating equitable green spaces in urban areas, like
Yep.
like where you are in Michigan. So, first of all, why is it so important to have access to urban green spaces? And second, could I actually find a semblance of equanimity in a green space in an urban area commensurate to the serenity and healing you find in wilderness? Maybe those two aren't exactly equal, but I think, you and I were talking a little bit offline about like having a park behind the house here, having some
Yeah,
trees in your backyard. What is there an opportunity for us, and do we have an obligation as citizens, as good people, to create those green spaces for ourselves and for our communities?
absolutely. I mean, the research is conclusive. I'm outside, green space, blue space, open space, however you want to call it, right? Is critical, and shade is really critical, and seeing a tree is really critical, and seeing different plants, and bugs and squirrels and raccoons and deer and moose. These things are absolutely critical. And I think the question of are these equal experiences is a really interesting one. I spent years of my life going on big multi-day expeditions. I believe in the 3-day effect, right? Florence Williams wrote this really beautiful book called The 3-Day Effect about this 72 hours and what happens after 3 days. And there's all sorts of working theories. We know about long-term memory. We know about short-term memory. We know less about intermediate memory. But one of the working hypotheses is that basically your experiences are filtered through the last 48 to 72 hours of your life, right? So if you come off of 3 days of just the most beautiful fishing, but also some rocky stuff, right? Because like good memories are always a little buggy, a little wavy, a little rainy. And you come home and you've had this great time with your buddies, and somebody like hits you with a car, like how much equanimity can you oftentimes someone to respond? You're like, oh, dude, that really sucks that you ran over my leg. It's gonna be but we're gonna get through this. It's all right
Hmm.
because you've just had this amazing experience, and so your body's really calmed down, your vagus nerves firing correctly, all this stuff. Meanwhile, if you spend 3 days like blowing Seattle traffic, and you're reminded that the Sean Kemp was the best Seattle ever had, and when is he
Right.
ever coming back? And like all these things, and and then you whatever, and then somebody like just barely cuts you off in traffic, and you're like, yeah, right, like you're like the rage, right? And it's why Mondays are so hard, right? Because we didn't quite get that full reset. So I spent all my time and energy on the 3 day effect and big, large landscapes and everything. But what was happening, Mark, is that I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't home. I wasn't home with my partner. I wasn't home with my kid.
Mm-hmm.
So when the pandemic happened and I couldn't do that as much anymore, I was like, what do I do? And sometimes if you're not used to it with a kid, an outdoor experience can be maddening because you might spend the same amount of time as you used to in the outdoors. Like you might go out for a couple hours, but you'll move 12 blocks, if that, right? Because the child sees awe and wonder in these small things that you would normally pass over. And so as I got to know my family again and thought, what do I want to do come next? The opportunity to work in these parks and urban spaces in Grand Rapids availed itself to me. And I was like, heck yeah, I need to learn this. And
Mm-hmm.
everything from being able to look outside and see a tree to wilder spaces or different spaces. And I think absolutely the experiences that you might have in beautiful landscapes you're discussing
Mm-hmm.
and the experiences you might have in the beautiful landscapes that are here in GR might be really different. They might require a different skill set, a different amount of time, um, even potentially different clothes to feel comfortable in it. But can you find awe? Can you find wonder? Can you find beauty? Can you move your body in a way that's joyful? Absolutely, yes.
Yep.
And that's what's been really fun for me is also training myself to do that, reminding myself of that. But in Michigan, we have endless wilderness too. And maybe not legislated big W wilderness,
Mm.
but tomorrow morning I'll get up and I'll drive a couple hours and I'll drop into the Manistee River with my buddy Clyde from Detroit, who I know through recovery circles. And we will get in a canoe and we'll paddle and we'll camp overnight and be home Sunday, and I can't wait. And that's a micro adventure right outside my back door. It'll take less than half a tank of gas to get to and from. So, and the thing that has surprised me the most, we do a lot of tree planting, and I always love seeing when you get somebody to a mountaintop, when you
Mm.
get somebody down Otterfield Glade, Cook City, Montana, one of my favorite places in the world. When you run a rapid on the Green River and you see people, right, and they're blissed out, they're stoked out, their brains are sort of fried in this beautiful way. You
Yeah.
kind of understand why surfers are always like, hey, bro, because their minds just work at this different level now.
Yes.
Same look on people's faces, same conversations that I've had with people after climbing the Grand Teton, after falling off surfboards and the Pacific Ocean, as I do when people plant a tree in a busy boulevard in Grand Rapids, Michigan, because they've seen something beautiful. They've worked together, they've dug, they've gotten dirty, they've connected in this real physical way to the world and to the people around them. And the awe, the bliss, the wonder, it's right there. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by saying the only place to go and do that is in these faraway landscapes for a lot of us, or you can only find this in the Northwest or
Yeah.
wherever. This is always going to look like this. That's not to say that people shouldn't go and visit those things. Those landscapes are incredible. They're mind blowing. They're healing. But you can have an incredible, mind blowing, healing experience planting tomatoes and focusing on the little bugs and the birds that you see out there. And that's what, if there's one thing, large landscape is so important to protect those places. But the more we can begin to seed wildflowers and milkweed back into our yards, the more we can find those spaces where we can leave a little pile of leaves or a little pile of sticks to play with. Just as critical.
One of my favorite poems of all time, uh, William Blake. To find a world in a grain of sand, or a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, or eternity in an hour.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're speaking of, and I love it. With the time we have remaining, I want to ask you a couple more questions about getting healthy and whole. You have, I think, a pretty radical, and by radical, I mean root, like root word, root tapped notion of our healthcare system and a shift and a pivot that it should go on to help us alleviate the Byzantine complexities of it, and frankly, the misappropriation of, I don't know, sort of a Western, prescribe pharma only approach. What is your notion of and action toward what healthcare should look like moving forward?
That's changed a lot over the last really kind of couple of years as I've seen like the rise of the wellness industry and its emphasis on individual action to find health in a system that is oftentimes incredibly degrading. And so rather than group action and responsibility, we're trying to pivot to individual action and reaction. And I think that's really challenging. And I think wellness is a dangerous word. I think it means a lot of different things to different people right now. And I believe in wellness and I believe in health, but I don't know if individual cold plunges are actually the way to health, or infrared, you know, infrared saunas. I mean, like these things are all nice, but if they're disconnected from community,
Right.
we're not going to be successful. And I think one of the biggest challenges with the healthcare system is it's driven towards growth and profit. Because in America, we have everything driven towards growth and profit, right? Like
Correct.
a lot of the military industrial companies that are supplying our soldiers, which I'm really glad they are. I was a soldier. I wanted the best equipment. If they're traded on the stock exchange, they're legally required to support the growth of their stockholders,
Sure.
not to support residents. And a lot of our hospital systems are nonprofit. That just means they're not paying out stakeholders. It doesn't mean that they're not paying individuals or board members or other things. I think income inequality is a huge issue. And we've been told that competition in this space is going to create better healthcare. We've been told that it's going to create better options for pharmaceuticals. But it's also given us opioids. It's also given us, I think, overprescription of certain things that make the good in that hard. And so I think, for example, during the pandemic, I understood a lot of vaccine hesitancy, especially coming out of the military and watching my friends who got the anthrax vaccine really struggle years later, right? Or if you had run-ins or you had family related to the Tuskegee Airmen or the opioid epidemic, and somebody's like, "Oh, you got to take this now." Oh, do I? What is that going to mean to me? And it's not, I believe in vaccines, but there's just this larger challenging of fear and conversations that aren't being had. And I think you're seeing it with doctors who are burning out too. And it's hard to get doctors, it's hard to get GPs, it's hard to get nurse practitioners right now. So I think figuring out how we create a more humane healthcare system is really important. 90%, right, of health happens outside, or 95% of health happens outside of hospital walls. So I think, to me, we've got to have a healthcare system. And I was talking with a friend of mine who's doing some really incredible work around mental health. And one of the things we were talking about is teaching people how to cook and teaching people how to select food that nourishes them, right? Like, how many times have you heard somebody say, "Oh, we're going to have a healthy dinner"? And it's like, I don't know if I want a healthy dinner. But a healthy dinner means you're having a good time, you're having fun, you're having a conversation, you're feeling connected to people. And it's fine if that's like, undressed, unseasoned quinoa, but it's also fine if sometimes it's like fried chicken and maple syrup and a waffle, right? Like if I do one of those things, everything in moderation, including moderation,
Right.
So I think there's a healthcare system where we recognize the value of recess. We're lucky our daughter goes to a school where she has 3 recesses a day. And that's sacrosanct in that school. And art is really important, and music is really important. And that's what I want to see, a healthcare system that is, if we're paying for anything, like, I think, and then there's always a challenge of modifying it, right? Because we've seen that with insulin prices, right? It's a necessity, so we know we can charge shit out of it. And yet music is a necessity, and we're not charging for it. And why aren't we paying for it? Or why isn't there more of that in the system?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to see a healthcare system where you get a prescription to play a trumpet or paint a picture or go outdoors, and you can take that and you can get a discount on, a sturdy pair of jeans or a rain jacket so you can get out on a day like today.
Yeah, I know I was taken by your suggestion over the last, some time here, that being in the world itself, in the outdoors, in nature, should be a part of a successful healthcare system. In fact, should potentially, be funded inside of that system. And that was pretty novel and interesting, and I think radical in that sense of the rooted word of our connection to being a part of the natural world, not separate from, but actually we are nature. We're here. We're on this planet. We're made. Get to borrow these bodies from the earth for a while. That, can you speak to that a little bit about like
Totally.
that being
Yeah. I mean,
integrated?
I do think we can integrate these things, right? And I think like figuring out, can we do therapy outside too, right? Is that a part of it? Can we have,
Yeah.
when the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, leases out land to a mineral lease, you can keep extending that indefinitely. And we're willing to subsidize that. And we do subsidize some hiking and trail riding a little bit. But I think if we want real health, and if our healthcare companies are nonprofits, then how do we get healthcare companies to invest in public lands, to increase trails, to increase access, so that you can get on your Mark Titus healthcare bus that
Mm-hmm.
takes you to park, right? That when you're that, and even beyond just the pay to engage piece, or that the clinic is paying you, right, through an insurance carrier or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also making exits to our buildings. Like, why isn't the exit to a hospital a trailhead?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't the exit to a school a trailhead, a bus stop a trailhead? So I think that's where I would love to see our healthcare companies really moving towards.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of sponsoring a wall at the ball field, can they sponsor, can they sponsor a map on the side of a bus? Can they sponsor these things that are going to get people out and get healthy? And I think that's where there's this big shift right now in this world too. There's that lack of community, which I think for a lot of people in connection, which is creating a lot of these issues. There's a lack of knowledge on how to get there. And I think you're seeing this split in this generation, and you and I are about the same age, where us and older, it's like we want the people behind us to have to suffer in the way we did. And we turned out okay. No, we didn't. But they're not willing to put up with it. And that's where I think you also see another split that's happening in this world, is people are willing to start, like, younger folks are like, yeah, I need wellness. I need health. I need time off to go to that park. I need time off to paint, or space in my life to paint. And I think that's where, like, I'd love to see insurance companies getting more involved in the protection and engagement around public lands and building of trails and lands conservation, and prescribing the outdoors. But I think, it's so hard. You go down into so many nuances, and then you're like, you don't want to make any absolute statement because it's going to come out. But like, we also don't want to commodify the outdoors in the way that
Right.
we commodified pain that led to the opioid epidemic. I love that question. I'm super sensitive. I think that's a positive. I think a lot of us in recovery, that's one of our, we have superpowers and we don't know what to do with them. And we don't live in a world right now that is super interested in superpowers, especially superpowers used in a team setting. I think that's why oftentimes we end up using and abusing substance, because we're trying to shut off the superpower. So we don't know how to put it. So I guess the emotion would be that I'm a really, like, I feel pretty deeply. But I think I had a friend of mine tell me my superpower was storytelling. And I think I love that. That's the nicest thing anybody maybe has ever said to me. And I think that's what I would pass on to other people. Tell a story, tell a narrative. And that's, I've talked a lot about, I think this is the big issue, but I do think there's such an issue right now. We talked a little bit about climate change before the show. The climate has changed. But I guess the thing that I would want people to take away is create a narrative that other people can see themselves in that's better than the narrative we're living in today, even if that means we lose things we love. We can create something better. The future is better. The opportunities in front of us are better than they've ever been. It's so exciting to be alive right now, to think about that. That doesn't discount the horror.
Yeah.
But I think the horror is happening because it's trying to stop these beautiful things that are coming.
Well, Stacy Bare, thank you for that perspective, for one, to leave on, and for joining the show today, and for your great work in the world. Truly an inspiration for me, and I know it will be for our listeners. Take good care for now, and we'll plan on seeing you down the trail.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. This has been super fun. Like, are we sure we didn't go to fourth grade together? This has been a really easy conversation. It's been super fun, man.
It's possible. It's possible. There's a bit of a mystery in my family from the West. So, but we'll pick this up another time, man. Take good care for now.
Take care, Mark. Bye.
How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love?
Thank you for listening to Save What You Love. If you like what you're hearing, you can help keep these conversations coming your way by giving us a rating on whatever platform you're listening from and leaving a comment on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the word out. Check out photos on our Instagram feed. We're at Save What You Love Podcast, and you can get links from today's featured guest in the show notes of this episode. Join our growing community by subscribing to our newsletter at avaswild.com and then clicking on Connect in the upper corner. You'll get exclusive offers on wild salmon shipped to your door and notifications about upcoming guests and more great content on the way. That's at avaswild.com, the word save spelled backwards, wild.com. This episode was produced by Emily Fern and edited by Patrick Troll. Original music was created by Whiskey Class. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you all down the trail.